Tonight we're looking at what COVID changes you'd want to keep in September. Lots to choose from, but which ones would you keep if you had the choice? That's what we're going to be discussing tonight.
Live from London, this is the Late Late Show with Amanda Wilson on Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live at ttradio.org or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
Good evening. It's Thursday. It's 10 p.m. So that, as always, can only mean one thing. It means we're counting down to the weekend. And as we count down to the weekend, we are counting down to the end of term. And when we get to next Monday, it will be 15 days, for me anyway, 15 days to go until the end of term. 23rd of July, we are coming for you. I hope you've had a good week so far. I hope it's been productive. I hope it's not been too overwhelming for you. If you're a secondary teacher, I hope that you have gone through the whole tag situation and you're kind of looking forward to a bit more of a smoother ride to the end of this half term. But I know for me, it's kind of one of those things where I've got 2 more big meetings to go, and once they're over, I know I'm on the home run. And I'm looking forward to playing that song, The Final Countdown. I'm so looking forward to that, playing that tune in a few weeks' time, because it will be the final countdown. So on tonight's show, we are talking about COVID changes, because over the past year there's been a lot of things that schools have had to put in place. The risk assessments have come into play, and we've had to change a lot of the things and a lot of the way that we do school. And at first, I'm not going to lie, it was a bit strange. It's like, oh, we've got to put this in place. We've got to change this. We've got to modify this. We've got to think about this. And there was a lot to think about. And it was a real headache to start with. I'm not going to lie. Doing those risk assessments and thinking about how people were going to move around the school, thinking about what the classrooms were going to look like, thinking about what lunch times, what break times were going to look like, how parents were going to come in school, how parents were going to go out of school, how we're going to do meetings, how we're going to do parents' meetings, how we're going to do assemblies. There was so much to think about. And it really did send a lot of us into a head spin, because it was a case of, how can we change the things that we've been doing for years and years and years? It really was a case of, we've always done it this way. How are we going to change it? It was almost like that was an impossible task to even have to contemplate. However, 15, 16 months later, some of those changes have actually been very effective. And so tonight, I want to talk about what changes have your school made since COVID began that you think, that's a positive change. We should have done that years ago, because there are some things in my school that, I've only been at my school, I've only been the head teacher at my school for 2 years, but there are some things that we did that now I think, why did we ever do it like that? Why on earth did we put ourselves through that pain? Why on earth did we have that kind of hassle? And I sent a tweet out asking this question earlier this week and also this evening. And I've had an overwhelming response this evening from people who have just listed, been sharing what they would like to keep in September. So if you have something that you think, if I was a head teacher, I need to petition my head teacher because this is something we've done and I think it should remain, please do text in. Or even if you're feeling brave enough, call in and you can tell me what that change is and why you think that's a change that your school should keep. But I'm going to kick off by saying that somebody said remote learning. Let's start with remote learning, because that has been something that I guess initially was a bit scary. It was an unknown quantity. Zoom and Teams and Google Classroom, they always existed, that existed for ages, but nobody really used them from a school perspective. And then all of a sudden, if you're into investing, which I am, Zoom shares last year went through the roof, as you can imagine. But doing lessons and delivering lessons online, it's almost become second nature. Yes, there are always still some things that are a bit, uncomfortable. But somebody said, what they would keep is the ability to do remote learning. So if they had a child off for an extended period of time, for instance, if you've got children self-isolating, I know that's a bit of a sore subject at the moment, so we won't labour on it. But if you have got children self-isolating or recovering from an illness or operation, we could still beam them into the lesson. And actually, at my school, especially in the sort of autumn term, we had a few children that were off, and it was really nice for them to be able to join some of the lessons. And kudos to the class teachers who were doing dual teaching, because they had to make sure that the child that was on Teams was able to access the learning and make sure that they could kind of get everything that the class was getting, as well as taking care of the class. But I think I agree with Penny. That's a suggestion that Penny's given, is that making sure that we can continue with remote learning. Another suggestion is assemblies. Now, this is one that I was thinking about today, because it's been lovely having assemblies on Teams, virtual assemblies, and we've done them every day since lockdown began or the second lockdown began. Even last year, we were making sure that we had assemblies online. And so since January, we've done our assemblies on Teams every day, 9:15 every morning. The classes get together and we have an assembly. And it's been like that when children were working at home and when they've come back into school. And it's been great. But there is no substitute for meeting in person. But the only problem with meeting in person, especially in a primary school, and I don't know if you've got any secondary colleagues out there that can attest to this and share their experience, is the amount of time that's wasted moving from the classroom to the hall, then sitting down, having to wait for all the other classes to arrive, then going through fantastic collective worship or assembly, depending what you call them, and then having to traipse back to the classroom afterwards. There are hours, as somebody said, lost time. The amount of hours that's lost walking to and from an assembly is, the hours that you're never going to get back in the timetable. And so if there was a way, and I was kind of thinking, right, how could we do it? Perhaps we could, get the year 5s and 6s to go straight into the hall, because we have our assembly, our collective worship at 9:15, and we start the school day at 8:55. So maybe they could come straight into the hall from the playground with their coats and bags. But that's a bit of a faff, because I don't know how it would work. But virtual assemblies are great. But like I said, there's no substitute for coming together. I don't know what you think. Please let me know what you think. How would you prefer to do assemblies? We're going to probably do a blended method in September. So there'll be some assemblies where it will be class-based, and there'll be some where it will be in person as well. So we kind of get a bit best of both worlds. But one of the ones that we're definitely going to be coming together is when we do singing assembly, because we love singing assembly. And virtual singing assembly, when you got the feedback and the delay, it's just really not the same. So singing assembly is definitely one we're looking forward to. Hopefully on the 19th of July, when lockdown finishes, we'll be all able to get together again and just sing our hearts out. But that's one of the things that quite a few people have said that's one thing that they would want to keep, virtual assemblies. And somebody else has said, and quite a few people, Paul Klein in particular, said virtual parents' evenings. What's your view on virtual parents' evenings? I mean, that's one of the things I think is kind of a no-brainer. From a parent's point of view, the convenience of just being able to log onto a computer wherever you are, and then meet your class teacher is great. You don't have to worry about leaving work, getting on a tube, getting on a bus, getting in your car, getting stuck in traffic potentially, or having to leave work early. You can just log on wherever you are, meet the teacher, and then go back to what you were doing before. Because obviously for a lot of parents, childcare is already sorted. And since Sobia said, yeah, they were brilliant. It's also great for the teachers. I mean, we use a system whereby we set it up, and the meeting lasts for 10 minutes. And at the end of the 10 minutes, the system automatically cuts you off, which is fantastic, because you get those parents who continue just talking. They just talk. They just talk and talk and talk. And you're one of these teachers who's trying your best to kind of interject and cut the conversation and try to, make eye contact with other parents to make them know that, I'm trying to finish this conversation, but these parents keep going on. With an online system, there is none of that. The end of 10 minutes, I think the parent gets a countdown. At the end of 10 minutes, your meeting is finished and you're on to the next one. And Sobia has also said, yeah, not going over time. She said Sobia has a full evening and never runs overtime. That is just, it's bliss, isn't it? It's just such a good feeling to know that regardless of what the parent might have to say and what complaints they might want to make, in 10 minutes time, it's all going to be over. And it is what it is. There's no complaints. So that's definitely something that I think should be kept. And obviously there are going to be those parents who, for one reason or another, may want or need to have face-to-face meetings. And I do think that we should always make room for that, because I think we should still try to accommodate parents as much as possible. But for me personally, I think the main format should be virtual, and then the exception to the rule would be in person. Let me know what you think about those. If you're a parent, do you prefer the virtual meetings or do you prefer face to face? Because some parents do prefer face to face. I mean, I remember going to my daughter's secondary parents' evening, and it was a bit of a mission, to be fair, having to go round to all the teachers, find the teachers in different parts of the school. It was a bit of a faff, to be fair. And I would have much preferred to know that I've got a meeting that I just log on to, click a button, the teacher's there, click a button, I log off, I'm done, going about my business, all from the comfort of wherever I want to be comfortable. So I think virtual parents' meetings are a definite keeper. And I hope schools will consider the benefits to both parties, not just the parents, but also to the staff as well. Because again, staff could just do it from home. Again, we've gone through the whole virtual learning. Staff know the expectations, making sure that you're in a room where there's, nobody overhearing you, and there's no sort of pictures of your loved ones up behind you. But it just means that, again, staff can be at home at a decent time, not having to worry about, getting home, especially in the autumn term when the nights get later and it gets darker. It's not the nicest thing to have to leave school at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the evening, shattered after doing a parents' evening. So I think that is definitely a keeper. Somebody else, and I think this is probably a primary thing, but again, secondary colleagues, if this is something you can relate to, then please do text in or call in and let me know. Someone said wearing PE clothes on a PE day. Now, for those who don't know what that means, because it is very much a primary thing, although it might be a secondary thing, is to allow children to wear their PE kits for the whole day. So again, it's a bit like the assemblies. It's a time saver. Rather than wasting time, children getting changed and losing clothes and clothes ending up all over the place, and then at the end of PE having to get changed back into their uniforms. Again, it's all a bit of a faff. But if they can come to school in their uniforms, do PE. I know, especially in secondary, you've got the issue of teenagers and body odor, and the challenge of them staying in the same clothes that they do PE for the whole day. It's probably not the nicest experience, not very pleasant. So that might be something that is not as nice as kind of from a primary school perspective. But again, it does save times. And as someone said, as Jacqueline Harris says, no one's going to end up wearing two pairs of socks or someone else's jumper, and nothing's going to be forgotten. So there's never going to be a chance of somebody forgetting their PE kit, because they're going to be coming to school in their PE kit. So they've kind of got no excuse whatsoever. And I think that also helps children to understand the importance of doing PE, because you come into school in your PE kit, you come into school ready to do that activity. And I know some children, we have a PE, sort of uniform in terms of, white t-shirt and a coloured, black shorts and what have you. And some children clearly flout that. So it might be an opportunity for some children to just wear their best garms throughout the day. But at the end of the day, there's an opportunity for us to make sure that children are well prepared for their PE lesson. Other suggestions that have come in via Twitter: staggered lunch times and play times. Now, again, this has been a game changer for us, simply because of how much calmer things have been in the playground. And our school is not a rowdy school. We're a primary school, one form entry. So, we've got quite a small number of children in the playground anyway, but we've got a very small playground. And when we've had to have 120 or so children outside, it's got really busy. It's got really, you've got a combination of key stage 1 children and key stage 2 at some point. And obviously the key stage 2, that they're good at trying not to run, knock over the little children, but inevitably these things happen. But since we only have 2 classes out at the time, and obviously because we can't mix bubbles, they've been in totally separate areas. But in September, what we're going to do is to just continue with the 2 classes outside, but allow them to mix. So there'll still be a lot less children in the playground at the same time, which means a lot more space for children to play, which is really important, because when you've got a crowded playground, there's just less area for children to play in. And it also means less incidents. And again, I think, same with secondary, Sobia said, it's the same for her. And it's worked extremely well. And it's one of those ones where, when we thought about it, maybe a couple of years ago, thinking, oh, should we just do it for the sake of doing it? It's, oh no, that will never work. Oh no, or just a logistical nightmare, because it means that this class has got to go to lunch at this time and this class has got to go to lunchtime. But isn't it interesting that when push comes to shove, and when you have no other choice, you can make it work? And I think this is the case with a lot of these changes that we've made due to COVID, that we've had to make the changes, we've had to make it work. And so in that necessity, we've seen how beneficial it's actually been. And, things like staggered playtimes, and, whether it's primary or secondary, it just works. It just works. And I think what we've noticed at our school is that the children in those classes are interacting with each other a lot better. So they're playing together a lot more, because, at the moment, obviously they're in a confined space, a more confined space. So they've got no choice, but it's just nice to see them playing together, interacting more, getting to know each other more, and just enjoying being together. So that is definitely a change that we are going to keep, as well as many other people. If you've just joined the show, we're talking about what COVID changes your school has implemented that you think should be kept in September. And there's lots of suggestions coming through on Twitter. Please feel free to put your suggestions, send your suggestions in via text. If you want to talk about what you would keep, then call in. I'll have you on live, because it'd be good to hear some of your thoughts live as well. Other suggestions that are coming in are things like, a lot of people have said virtual parents' evenings and staggered breaks. This is one that, again, it has been such a great change, is individual equipment. With children having to have their own pencil, their own ruler, have somewhere to store them all, that has made a lot of difference. And again, that's cut out a lot of time. I mean, it's probably something that happens in secondary schools anyway, but I think in primary schools, a lot of time was left. Can somebody hand out the rulers? Can somebody hand out colour pencils? Now we're doing this lesson. Can somebody hand out these, please? Can somebody pack these up, please? Can somebody collect them in, please? Can somebody hand these? And it took up a lot of time. And invariably, it meant that things got lost, or things got misused, or things got wasted. But now, because children have got, in our year 5 and 6, they've got the old-fashioned, like the Victorian desk where you lift up the lid. I love those desks. So the year 5 and 6s have got those. And then throughout the rest of the school, we purchased something called a sack pack, which is a bag that goes that hooks on the back of a chair, and then children can put their books. So they've got their reading books in there. They've got their pencils and their rulers. I think they've got glue sticks in there. They've got a set of coloured pencils. They've got everything they will need for a lesson. So children don't have to get up and walk around. And again, that's the other beauty of having children having their own equipment. There's no more getting up, walking around, wandering, looking for this and wandering, looking for that, because it should be in your sack pack. And as you're the only one that goes in your sack pack, if you put it back there, that's where it should still be. So that has been really beneficial. I mean, it wasn't an initial outlay to buy these bags, but they are bags that will last a very long time, and it makes sense. And they also reduce the kind of amount of space that you have to use for things like, you don't have to find somewhere, you don't have to have trays necessarily, because it traditionally used children in primary schools used to have trays where they put their pencils or their rubbers or their pencil cases and all these other paraphernalia that they brought to school. But now, because they've got these sack packs on the back of their chairs where they can put their pencils, pens, etc., we don't need the additional trays in the classroom. So actually, the other benefit is creating a bit more space in the classroom, because it means that there's less cupboard space taken up. So I think it kind of little things, it's the little changes that we make that have made a really, really big difference. And Sobia's kind of said that, going back to the whole staggered lunch times, that she thinks that the only thing that's an issue is that staff have half an hour for lunch, and sometimes they don't get enough time to eat. Yeah, I guess that would be a consideration that you'd have to take forward if you were going to make it a permanent fixture. Staff at my school the teachers have a 45-minute break, and that's I mean, they would have had an hour break, but we cut it short simply because we sort of chopped a bit of time off at the end of the school day so we could finish the school day a bit earlier. And we have midday meal supervisors that cover the lunch hour, so that's not much of an issue. But I guess in secondary school, and I'm assuming, Sobia, that you're in a secondary school, but please correct me if I'm wrong, that you may need more, that you may need more of a stagger to kind of get all those children through the lunch hall, which again would mean that teachers need to be ready to start teaching at a certain time. But again, it's one of those things where I guess if those who do the timetabling sat and thought about it again logistically, there may be a way around it. Half an hour lunch, especially in at the current time, is no lunch, and you want to be able to, teachers deserve a decent. I mean, obviously, it says in teacher standards a suitable length of time for a break, but half an hour really isn't a suitable time, because by the time you've dismissed your classes, if you go down to the canteen or go to the shop or wherever, so you've already lost 20 minutes. So it's really difficult to be able to say, yes, let's stagger the lunch times and make it effective for everybody and make it work for everyone. So something often has to give. But when it comes to staggered play times, I think that's where you really see the benefit, and making sure that children can get the best out of their time outside. Other changes that people have suggested on Twitter that work are things like, the other thing that I wanted actually, or that we've started doing, is hand sanitizing. And again, I don't know how you feel about that. So at the moment, when our children come into the school playground, they join the lines and then they sanitize their hands. Then they go into the classrooms and they wash their hands, and then obviously they sanitize throughout the day. We're going to keep the sanitizing. We're going to make sure that children continue to sanitize when they come into school, into the school playground, because that's important. Children still need to, who knows what children do on their way to school, nose, fingers up noses and all over the place, and running their hand along walls and it doesn't even bear thinking about. In a primary school setting, children's hands go everywhere, and it's not nice. So actually knowing that as soon as they come through the school gate, they're going to get their hands sanitized, it just makes perfect sense. And again, one of the things that I did was I sent a survey out to staff. And I sent a survey out to staff and said, look, these are the things that we've changed. What do you think should go, and what do you think should stay? So I think I called it, should it stay or should it go? It's a bit like the song. And staff voted on the things that they thought they should stay, and they voted on the things that they thought should go. Because I think it shouldn't be because I'm the head teacher, I'm not the one that has to implement a lot of these things. I'm not the one that has to deal with a lot of these things. It's very easy for me to sit in my office and say, yeah, that'll work and that'll work and that'll work, but I'm not doing it in practice. So for me, it's really important to get my teacher's voice in terms of, right, what do you think will work and what do you think won't work? And so the changes that we're keeping are the ones that won the majority vote. And to be fair, some of them it was kind of like, everybody said, yeah, we should keep that. And hand sanitizing was one of those things that people thought, you know what, this is something that we need to keep. I mean, our premises manager, God bless his soul, Dave's been amazing. And he put up as I'm sure was the case in pretty much all schools, those hand sanitizer units. And so, you can't you can't walk sort of 5 steps without seeing a hand sanitizer unit. And obviously that does take up money because it costs to fill them. But the benefit of having them when you've just had to, I don't know, wipe a child's nose and you're not near a tap, or, when you're going into the hall to, to sort out dinner or something, just being able to give a little pump and sanitize your hands has been great. And it's become second nature for the children to do that. Sanitizing their hands is a way of life now. I mean, to be fair, it should have been a way of life before. However, we're not going to go there. We understand that some things take time to filter through, and an understanding as to how things should be done. But now I think people have a lot better understanding of why it is important to keep your hands clean all the time. And this generation of children will grow up sanitizing their hands. So, this is lots of ideas in terms of things that should go, things you should keep. We want to continue this conversation after the break, but we're going to go to the news and to a short ad break. We'll be back right after.
Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. At Creative Resources, we've been rethinking what a classroom can be. We've created a huge range of more than 2,500 original and exciting resources that span across more than 15 different subject areas. Whether you're looking for primary or secondary level resources, careers options, PSHE, arts, or humanities, Creative Resources have the resources for you. We offer full curriculum packages and unique, challenging escape rooms themed on topics such as Shakespeare, Tudors, and fractions. We have quizzes, task cards, Tarsier puzzles, and lots more. Better still, more than 100 resources can be accessed for free. Just visit our website, www.cre8tiveresources.com. You can get 10% off any order you make on our website by using the discount code TT Radio. Creative Resources, made for teachers by teachers. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn. Some councils in England are awarding grants of up to £150 to put towards the cost of a school uniform to parents and guardians who are struggling financially. The amount awarded does vary between local authorities, meaning that people in different parts of the country may receive varying amounts. Children who live in North Lincolnshire are eligible for the grants if they meet the free school meals eligibility criteria. A statement on northlinks.gov.uk reads, "Only one grant, currently £20, is paid when the child is at primary school, and one grant, currently £30, when they are at secondary school." The grant is not available everywhere, as even though the help falls under the Education Act 1990, it isn't a statutory right in England, and there are separate systems in place for Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. The English Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, has announced that mobile phones could be banned from classrooms in England. Mr. Williamson has stated that mobile phones are not just distracting, but when misused or overused, they can have a damaging effect on pupils' mental health and well-being. He said, "I want to put an end to this, making the school day mobile-free." Some school leaders believe that there is a role for mobile phones to be used in the classroom as a learning tool, but ministers disagree, believing that removing phones from schools would increase pupil attainment and help address issues such as pupils engaging in sexting. Dr. Amanda Gummer, child development expert and founder of the Good Play Guide, said, "Most schools I know have very strict controls over when mobile phones can and can't be used. And I think schools should be empowered to manage that according to their ethos and community. I think there should be a difference between ages. I have no problem with banning phones in primary schools, but my general philosophy is that you should only ban the things you absolutely have to, because it just sends them underground and it becomes a taboo thing. You end up missing opportunities to promote learning and development. Children need to learn how to use mobile phones responsibly, and schools have a role to play in teaching them how to do this, she said, adding that most schools are adept at managing child behaviour around phones. According to Mind, too many young people in secondary schools across England are being denied vital mental health support at school and by mental health services, affecting their ability to participate in education. Mind's inquiry into secondary education and mental health, not making the grade, why our approach to mental health at secondary school is failing young people, which was released on the 30th of June, stated that 96% of young people surveyed across England reported that their mental health had affected their schoolwork at some point. Mind is calling for schools to look into the way they respond to young people experiencing behavioural problems because of mental health problems and trauma as a matter of urgency. This has been your daily education news briefing.
Welcome back. You're listening to Teachers Talk Radio. My name's Amanda Wilson, and you're listening to The Late Late Show. And in tonight's show, we are talking about those COVID changes that your school has brought in that you think, actually, this is a really good idea and we need to keep a hold of this. I don't know whether you've come from a school where your leadership team have had that conversation with staff where they've said, okay, what do you think should go, what do you think should stay, and they've brought you into the conversation. That's what I did with my staff, so that, because like, as I said before the break, it's them that's got to implement those changes. So if that's you and you kind of thinking, actually, yeah, we should be, I think teachers, staff should have a say in what happens in September in terms of the changing, because like I said, you're the one that's going to have to initiate them. So what changes has your school made since COVID began that you think, you know what, we need to keep this. This has worked well. This has been really effective. We need to hold on to this. Text in, call in. I'd love to speak to you, to hear what you think and to find out your reasons why that's a change that you think your school should keep. Because I think there are so many positive things that have come out of COVID. And as I said at the top of the show, 2-3 years ago, or maybe 3-4 years ago, some of these changes are things that we would have thought, you know what, that's just not going to be possible. We can't change that. We've done it like that for ages. Why on earth would we change it? Why on earth are we going to do anything different? That's how we've always done it. And yet all of a sudden, March 2020, we've been forced to change the way that we do things. We've had to do things differently. We've had to think outside the box in some cases. And actually one of the things I think it has made us do as schools is to make us a bit more individual as a school. Because very often we do it this way because we know that school does it that way, and that school does it that way, and that school does it that way, rather than thinking what works for our school. How can we make sure that it's suitable for our school? And again, whereas before it might have been the case of that'll just logistically, it'll be just take too much time to organise, it'll mean too much extra work for this member of staff, or these member of staff will never go for it. Some things were never broached because it was always assumed that staff would never go for it. And obviously staff haven't had a choice this time round, because the government have said, you've got to have bubbles, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. So it's been forced into it. And it's only now that you can see the benefits. I think sometimes when you're forced into it, you do then begin to see the benefits. So what are those changes? Again, I put a question out on Twitter and I got some really great responses. And one of the things that came back was about the dropping off in collection arrangements. And I think I know my daughter works as a teaching assistant at a secondary school, and I know that for them, the way that they've had to stagger the children coming into school in the morning has just been mind blowing. You've got children coming in at this time, then you've got children coming in 10 minutes later, then another group coming in another 15 minutes later. And then throughout the course of the day, I think they're going home sort of any time from 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I know for secondary schools, it's probably been a bit more of a nightmare. But then also, it depends on how many entrances you've got and how many, gates you've got. In our school, and it's funny because beforehand we used to have all our parents coming in our key stage 1, key stage 2 children, everyone coming in and out one gate, and it was a single gate that led on to the sort of main road, and everybody used to squeeze through that gate. And that's how the school always did it. They, like I said, I've only been there for 2 years, but that's the gate they'd always used. They hadn't done anything different. Now there's another at the other end of the playground. There's another massive gate, and it's a gate that usually kind of, if you've got like the fire engines have to come through, they would use that gate. So during lockdown, when we started getting parents coming back into school, we had a one-way system, and we opened up those massive double gates, and parents came in that gate and then went out the small gate. And it's almost like a light bulb moment that went on, because it's like, well, yeah, this is how it should be and should always have been. Why on earth were we trying to squeeze everybody? It's like trying to squeeze a camel through the eye of a needle. That's what they'd done since the school was created back in the 1800s, no doubt. Everybody was just squeezing through one gate, in and out. Pushchairs, prams, trolleys, shopping bags, children, everybody. And people obviously not didn't always wait. And it wasn't like when they went the kind of pavement outside the gate wasn't a large, it was a limited amount of space, but everybody squeezed out. But now we've got everybody coming through one gate and going out the other gate. We've got a one-way system, and it works perfectly. The same in our early years as well. We've got parents that come in one gate and go out the other gate, and the gate that they're now coming in through is a gate that we never used. We never used that gate. And it's like, why did we never use that gate? And I think some of it might have been because it's all the way around the other side. So parents have to walk around the other side. But it's like, so what? It's like, it's a few more minutes on your journey, but it's not detrimental to your journey. And parents have got used to it, and parents have just run with it. And parents can see the benefit in doing it that way, because from a safeguarding point of view, you've not got parents coming in and out, and you can keep an eye on which parents are coming in and which parents are going out. And I think from that point of view, having that single entrance makes things a lot easier. We've got little dots on the floor in our early years. So we've only got a few parents coming in at a time. They stand on the dots so we can see those children when they go to their parents. Whereas before, you had all the parents coming in, they'd all be in a crowd. You try and send a child off to their parent. The child can't really see their parent, can't see where they're going. And, it could become distressing for some children sometimes. But the new system, again, it's just like, this just makes so much sense. And a lot of these changes that we've made since COVID are just making so much sense, which is why a lot of schools are opting to keep them and saying, we're not going back to the old system. We're not going back to the old way of doing things. When it comes to our Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2, we've let parents come in, the one gate, like I said, go out the other gate. It's just become the way of doing things. And although some parents might want to be able to come in through the other gate, we're not going to go back there, because we have to think what works best for us as a school, not what's most convenient for parents. And very often, I think schools tend to do, or not schools necessarily, but schools think about what's most convenient for parents rather than what works best for us as a system for the school, which will also benefit the parents. Because I think if parents can see, them going through the school one way, it means their children can go to them. They're not having to cross over. Then, children aren't getting lost because their parents have kind of wandered off to talk to another parent. It's very clear where children are. Now, when I put this out a couple of days ago, somebody tweeted back and said that the drop off and collection at specific gates was a benefit, one of the things that they were definitely going to keep. And they said that what was good is that now, or what's not so good is that school adults have to police children not to go on the equipment. So they've obviously got climbing equipment in the playground where they get collected from. And one of the teachers that sent this tweet in was saying that you've got these little toddlers that are climbing up on the climbing frames and what have you. Parents coming to school, the children, just enjoying themselves in the climbing frames, and the parents are expecting the head teacher to climb up on the equipment and get the children down. And I just thought, some parents are incredible. It bewilders me why some parents behave in that way. As Sobia said, in terms of the fact that these things are often historic, it's difficult to change when it's always been done that way. But staff, parents, and students have no choice. That's right. They've had no choice but to change. So even though it's like, yeah, it's always been that way, I think it's always been that way because nobody's been brave enough to think, let's make a change. And it is a big deal when you have to make a change, because you have to bring everybody on board, and you have to be able to convince everybody that the change that you're making will benefit them in some way, shape, or form. So when you're making a change, it is a case of, we're doing this because, and when people can understand the why, and one of my favorite books is Simon Sinek's Start With Why. When people understand the why, there's going to be a lot more buying. So when it comes to the one-way systems, if people can see the benefit to them, even though the change may not be for them, but if people can see, oh, okay, this is how I can see it can benefit me, they're much more likely to buy into it and then go with it. And I think that's the case with a lot of the changes. A lot of these things where it's always been done that way, it is a case of, yes, but now it's time to try something different. I know that one of the head teachers that I know of a local school, she their school had an open door policy, and their open door policy was literally open door, whereby the parents used to come into the school, literally into the school building in the mornings, wander down the corridors, take their children into the classrooms, probably hover by the classroom doors, have a chat. At my previous school, one of the first, when I sort of my school where I was a deputy head, we had parents that used to do that, used to come into the school, wander upstairs, take their child's packed lunch upstairs because they've forgotten. And, that's how it always been. So when I came in and this other head teacher was saying, for her, she wanted to make that change to stop parents coming in. But she was really nervous about it because she said, well, they've always done that. The parents are just used to being able to come into the school. And she wasn't sure how the governors would respond in terms of, because again, from a governor's point of view, it's like, oh no, we embrace that opportunity for parents to come into the building, and it's their school. We want them to feel like it's their school, but it's a safeguarding issue. And one of the things that we said to her is, in terms of trying to put that point across and the why, in terms of why you want to change it, is because this is a safeguarding issue. So even though we've always done it like that, because it's probably like that in the 70s, where things were quite open and free and anyone could come and go, and you probably had teachers, parents, I mean, it wasn't that bad because I was a child of the 70s, and it wasn't that bad at all. But, it was a lot more open and, free to parents. So just because it's always been done that way, there comes a point in time where things have to change. And when it comes to things like, parents coming into school building, because that's just the way it is, it's like, no, we've got to change this. And I remember when I made that change in my previous school, and again, this was nothing to do with COVID, this was just a change that I saw needed to happen. There were the odd parents who, because they were used to just coming in and doing what they want, it took a bit of time for them to get to grips with, no, this is what's going to happen, and this is a change that's going to stay. But eventually, they just accepted it. And I think it's the same with a lot of these COVID changes. This will be a bit uncomfortable for a while, but eventually you'll get used to it. And as we are finding, eventually you'll be like, well, how did we ever do it that way in the first place? And I think it's really important that those who are in leadership understand that whole change process that individuals have to go through. Because for some, change is easy. You know, you can tell them this is going to happen, and tomorrow they're with it. They're with you. They're moving with you. Whereas some people, change is very uncomfortable, and so you have to walk them through the process. Like I said before, it's getting them to understand why you're making the change. It's getting them to understand the benefit for them. It's getting them to understand, you know, the benefit for others. But for some people, that change has to be walked through. I don't know if any of you have read that book, Who Moved My Cheese? And that's a great book about talking about change and doing things differently. And I think we know we need to embrace and understand that people will deal with things differently. So other changes that people said are they would like to keep, um, parents booking in for events. Now, this was from Jamie Berry, and he said that they had parents booking in for events. And I said to him, "Well, what kind of events are parents booking into?" Because I wasn't quite sure. And he said, "Well, what they've done is, you know, whereas before, when parents came in for class assemblies or came for workshops or PTA meetings, the parents would just kind of turn up. Whereas now, parents have to book if they're going to come to those events because, and again, obviously, because they need to know who's coming to school, but it just makes it easier to manage. So they set up a form on Office 365. And again, it's another um, product that is just, you know, Microsoft are probably just thinking, thank goodness we had this thing in place already, because their revenue sales must have gone up exponentially over the past year. The same with Google. Their sales must have gone through the roof exponentially because of the number of schools buying into these services. But this school, they set up a form, you know, they send the form out, parents book for whatever event it is, and then if your name is not on the list, you're not coming in. And I think actually from a from a safeguarding point of view of knowing who's in your building at any particular time, that kind of makes sense. Because I guess when normally you have, you know, you might have workshops or parents coming in for assembly, generally speaking, in prior, you know, prior to COVID, you didn't necessarily, you know, someone came in for assembly, you weren't standing there taking a register of which parents were coming in. If you did a parents' workshop, the only way that you might have captured which parents were in attendance is if you did an evaluation. Whereas actually, COVID has caused us to have to know which parents are in school, which visitors are in school. And obviously, it's not always practical, especially if you're doing some kind of workshop where you've got lots of parents coming in at the same time. It's not always feasible to have lots of parents coming in and signing in, you know, the signing in system and having their photo taken and peeling off the sticker. It's just not practical to do that. But if you've got a booking system where parents have had to book first, and then when they come into school, you can just tick them off, then at least, again, from a safeguarding, from a health and safety, if there's a fire and you have to do an evacuation, you know exactly who is in the building. So, you know, that wasn't something that we've done because we've just not had parents in school, because we've done any of our workshops have all been online. But thinking about it, it's like, actually, yeah, when we do go back to having parents coming into school for events, that's a really good way of doing it. Having that booking system so that we know. And parents, again, are now used to using things like Microsoft Forms. You know, we've used what's it called, SurveyMonkey, a lot over the past year. So parents are used to that way of doing things. So again, it's not going to be new to them, but I think it's having to sit down with parents and saying, look, yes, we know that COVID's over. We know we don't have to have these restrictions in place. However, we are choosing to keep them because of the benefit to this area, that area, or the other area. So yeah, I think, you know, there's certain things that definitely it just makes sense, really. It kind of like it's a what they call it, a no-brainer to keep certain things. And I think if schools can maintain those systems and processes, but not just kind of stop there, but keep innovating, because I think it's always about finding now we're kind of used to having had to do things differently. Now it's a case of, right, what other processes or systems can we modify or can we update? Because some things, I mean, I know when I went into the school where I'm working now, one of the systems that they had for booking parents onto parents' evening was the kind of list on the door. and then parents used to come and write their names on a piece of paper to book in for parents' evening. And I'm like, no, why would you do that? Why would you have that system where, you put the form up and then it's basically whoever can run fast enough to the classroom to write their child's name, or for the child to run to the classroom where the form is pinned to write their name on the thing? It doesn't make sense. Now we've got the booking system where we use whatever system it's called. We've got the booking system for parents to book their parents' evening. It just makes so much more sense. And it's, automating things has made things easier. And, it's again, it's kind of thinking that's what people have to do in the real world. People have to book for things online. Now you have to book for doctor's appointments online. You book for a restaurant online. When you're booking cinema tickets, you do it online. When you're doing your online shopping, you do it online. So the online world doesn't need to stop at the school gate. The online world should be able to continue when you get through the school gate. So parents shouldn't be at a loss to know what to do and how to do things. And I think it's kind of making sure that parents have the skill and the knowledge to be able to do that. Because I think, and to be fair, we've been doing it for a year, so parents got no excuses really. The other thing that has been mentioned quite a few times, and Miss S has just tweeted this as well, is meetings remotely. So staff meetings, staff briefings, all those meetings that normally held in person, doing those remotely. And I think staff much prefer that as well. And again, if you're a member, if you're a teacher, and that's the way your school's gone, is that something that you found beneficial? I know that for my staff, on a Friday we have a briefing from 8:30 to 8:45. We have a Friday briefing where we kind of just go through the diary for the following week and any business and that kind of thing. And staff staff need to be able to get themselves ready in the morning for the lesson or for teaching. And so whereas in times past have to kind of stop what they're doing to go to the staff room or go to the hall to listen to me babble on for 15 minutes while they're actually in minds thinking, okay, I've got to do this in the classroom, got to do this in the classroom, got to do this in the classroom, all before we go out at 1:45, it's kind of cutting into their time. Whereas now, because the meeting's virtual, it's on Teams, all they need to do is log on to Teams, make sure they're listening. They can still kind of potter around in their classroom doing those things so long as they're listening to what's going on, and know that they're not necessarily losing out on any time, because time is precious to staff. Every minute counts. And so if you can help them to make the most of the time they've got, I think it's always going to be appreciated. We've, having our staff training, so we call professional development meetings on Teams, has its pros and cons. I don't know what you think. It has its pros and cons. Again, it's nice because it means that staff can just be in their classrooms and just tune in. Some staff, they do it from, if they get to go, if they're on PPA, then they will do it from home. But it just means that everybody can access it from wherever they are. The only downside of doing things like staff training virtually is that staff like to be together. And the challenges of, although Teams and iZoom has the breakout rooms, when you want to kind of say to people, okay, I want you to have this discussion, it's kind of not the same having a kind of small group discussion virtually. It's just not the same. I don't know what you think. How do you feel about the whole kind of concept of breakout rooms when it comes to having to discuss things in groups? Because I think you lose some of that discussion because you're just not there present with people. So I think there's a time and a place for some meetings, and when you've got somebody who's an outside trainer delivering meetings, again, it just opens up a whole new world, because it means that you can have somebody, a trainer who's in another part of the country or another part of the world, and they can deliver training. So from that point of view, I think virtual meetings for staff is a fantastic idea, but there are always times and places where it's actually better to have them in person. And I that's probably the same for any industry. The whole concept of virtual meetings is something that I think is beneficial, whether you know work in an office or in a school or wherever you work. I think virtual meetings, even having them at for our church has been fantastic because you can just do it from wherever you are, and it kind of takes the stress out of trying to get somewhere, especially if you're one of these, if you have to travel to get to your um, training. It does make it more stressful. When you get to the training, then you're not quite present for a while because you're kind of thinking about your journey and you're thinking about this and you're thinking about the other. Whereas actually, if you know that you can just log on wherever you are and join the meeting, it's a lot less stressful. The only downside that I would say about virtual meetings is that people do then have to, and there's some extent where people would do it in person, but not as much. But because it's on the computer, people do have the tendency to then continue to work on the computer. So they're having the meeting, but you can see they're tapping away because you can see where their eyes are going. I'm always kind of looking to see where people's eyes are, and you can always tell whether their eyes are focused on whoever's speaking or they're focused on reading an email on the screen. And it is quite funny sometimes. You can see someone's eyes are clearly reading an email or clearly reading a document, or they're typing something. You think, pay attention, and there is a certain point where you think there is a point where it's kind of, I don't know, a bit rude. Do you think? What do you think? Is it a bit rude to be on in a virtual meeting and you're doing something else at the same time? I know people do that in person. I've been in staff meetings where I've seen members of staff, when we had physical meetings, where I've seen members of staff on their laptops, not writing notes about the meeting, but doing their planning or doing something else. And I think there's a certain level of, I do think it's a bit disrespectful, from in my opinion, because it means that you're not giving your full attention to the speaker at the front. Now, I know sometimes the speaker at the front can be very dull and boring and it may not interest you, but at the same time, it's important that you're present, and so I think doing something else, and I put my hands up. I've done it from time to time as well, but I make a conscious effort not to, because I like to put myself in the other person's shoes and think, well, if I was doing training and I could see somebody else, engaged in another activity, I'd kind of, I wouldn't be best pleased. So I think, that whole concept of, if you're in a meeting, you're in a meeting, and you give, you're fully present. The other thing, and again, this comes down to the whole, it's meeting etiquette, and this is virtual meeting etiquette. Let me know what you think. Is it right, if you're in a formal meeting, to eat while you're in that meeting? Let me know text in. What do you think? Is it right to, for someone to be eating a sandwich or eating a lunch? Obviously, if they said, if it's a small meeting, and it's just, one-to-one, it's like, yeah, we're having a working lunch. But, sometimes I'm watching people on the street and they're really getting into whatever food they're eating. And it's just like, it's off-putting. It's like, we're in a meeting, we're in a formal meeting. And I don't know whether you do that if you're in person. I guess it's kind of that mindset as, would you do this if you were in an actual meeting, physically, in the same room as somebody? And if you would, wow, kind of thing, I guess. Or is it a case of, well, it's a different atmosphere, it's a different scenario, so it doesn't matter whether you're eating. I mean, people drink cups of tea and drink drinks, that's fair enough. But when someone's having a, big old sandwich or munching on a packet of crisps, and I guess, what it might be for me, it might be the fact that you just then obsessed with watching this person eat, and you're watching their mouth chomp, 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 and it's just off-putting. You don't want to see, you don't want to see someone eating, and it's one of those things where once you see it, you can't not then focus on something else, because your eye keeps going back to them, and your eye keeps going back to the fact that their mouth is chomping away on a sandwich or on an apple or something, and it is just off-putting. It might just be me. It might just be me, just losing my attention span and misfocusing. I don't know. Is it just me? Does anybody else feel that way? I'd love to know, because if it's me, then it's clearly something I need to work on. Something else in terms of other changes that people like. I mean, we talked about the whole virtual parents' evening, hand sanitizing, staggered playtime, lots of different ideas that people have tweeted in and given suggestions in terms of things that they would like to keep. So we're just going to, after the break, we're just going to have a few more suggestions of things that you might want to keep in September. If your head teacher came to you and said, right, what things do you want to keep come September that we've implemented during COVID? What would you say? I'm going to be looking for people to call in after the break.
Every teacher loves stationery, right? Imagine getting a selection of fun, beautiful and unique stationery items designed and selected especially for teachers, delivered through your door every month. You need to check out teacherslovestationery.club.
I'm always so excited when the box arrives. It's such a treat.
My Teachers Love Stationery Club box is just a little treat to myself every month.
It's always full of delightful and surprising items, including some really good quality stationery brands like Faber-Castell and Stabilo.
And because you never know what you're going to get, it makes it even more fun and special when you get it.
It feels really great to be supporting a family business that's run by real teachers. I can't help feeling like they just know what I'm going to enjoy using stationery-wise better than I do myself.
Visit teacherslovestationery.club and enter the code TTRadio when you buy your first stationery box to save £2 today. teacherslovestationery.club. This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
This is your latest Teacher Talk Radio News with Gail Glenn. Some councils in England are awarding grants of up to £150 to put towards the cost of a school uniform to parents and guardians who are struggling financially. The amount awarded does vary between local authorities, meaning that people in different parts of the country may receive varying amounts. Children who live in North Lincolnshire are eligible for the grants if they meet the free school meals eligibility criteria. A statement on northlinks.gov.uk reads, "Only one grant, currently £20, is paid when the child is at primary school, and one grant, currently £30, when they are at secondary school." The grant is not available everywhere, as even though the help falls under the Education Act 1990, it isn't a statutory right in England, and there are separate systems in place for Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. The English Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, has announced that mobile phones could be banned from classrooms in England. Mr. Williamson has stated that mobile phones are not just distracting, but when misused or overused, they can have a damaging effect on pupils' mental health and well-being. He said, "I want to put an end to this, making the school day mobile free." Some school leaders believe that there is a role for mobile phones to be used in the classroom as a learning tool, but ministers disagree, believing that removing phones from schools would increase pupil attainment and help address issues such as pupils engaging in sexting. Dr. Amanda Gummer, child development expert and founder of the Good Play Guide, said most schools I know have very strict controls over when mobile phones can and can't be used. And I think schools should be empowered to manage that according to their ethos and community. I think there should be a difference between ages. I have no problem with banning phones in primary schools, but my general philosophy is that you should only ban the things you absolutely have to, because it just sends them underground and it becomes a taboo thing. You end up missing opportunities to promote learning and development. Children need to learn how to use mobile phones responsibly, and schools have a role to play in teaching them how to do this, she said, adding that most schools are adept at managing child behaviour around phones. according to Mind, too many young people in secondary schools across England are being denied vital mental health support at school and by mental health services, affecting their ability to participate in education. Mind's inquiry into secondary education and mental health, not making the grade, why our approach to mental health at secondary school is failing young people, which was released on the 30th of June, stated that 96% of young people surveyed across England reported that their mental health had affected their schoolwork at some point. Mind is calling for schools to look into the way they respond to young people experiencing behavioural problems because of mental health problems and trauma as a matter of urgency. This has been your daily education news briefing.
Welcome back to Teachers Talk Radio. You're listening to Amanda Wilson on the Late Late Show, and we are talking about COVID changes that your school have made that you think should stay in September. So as a teacher or a member of support staff, what do you see that's worked really well? And we've talked about a number of things this evening. We've talked about staggered playtimes. We've talked about virtual parents' evenings. You know, I've mentioned hand sanitizing as something that we're definitely going to keep at our school. We've talked about parents booking in for events, which somebody suggested on Twitter, which I'm actually going to probably implement come September in one way, shape or form for some meetings. I think that's been a really positive change. Somebody mentioned changes to PPA at their school, and what their school have done is to allow teachers to take their PPA at home. And they do it every other week, I think they said. Now, this is something we've always done, is to allow our teachers to take PPA at home, simply because there's just not enough space in the school. And now where we've been having to avoid mixing bubbles, so when we have intervention groups, you know, there's only certain spaces in the school that we have. A very small school, or a small school with very few areas to use for additional learning. So when it comes to staff taking their PPA, there's kind of only really one extra space that they can use. So staff being able to have PPA at home, it just makes sense. And to be fair, I know some head teachers are reluctant to do that because they think, oh, you know, directed time and, you know, what have you. But it's, you know, whether they're in school or out of school, if staff are going to do PPA, they're going to do PPA. It's their time. You know, it's their planning, preparation and assessment time, and how they use it is entirely up to them. So if they decide that during their PPA day and they spend it at home, they're going to spend it down at Blue Water, or they're going to spend it watching This Morning, or they're going to spend it planning for the whole of the autumn term, so long as they know that's the time they have, it's up to them. We need to trust adults to be adults. We need to trust teachers to know how to utilize their time. So the fear of, you know, if they're not in school doing it, then that's going to be a danger. It's like, you know, just deal with it. I also think it's kind of taken away from the idea that staff should be in school doing PPA just in case we need them. But my thought is, well, why would you need them? It's their PPA. So effectively, they're not around. And I think, and I, you know, again, I hold my hands up. This is something that I used to do a lot, is kind of used to ask, you know, somebody used to be off site, you say to the teacher, okay, can we swap your PPA? But then it just got into this cycle of always having to give people time back, and it became more challenging. And so now it's like, if that person's on PPA, they are on PPA. They are not in school. They are not around. They should not be asked to do anything apart from their own planning. And I think from a you know, timetabling point of view, and I recognise and I know and understand that for secondary schools it may not be as cut and dry as I'm making it seem, because if you've got a member of staff off and you've got a year 8 history class that you've got to cover, something's got to give. You've got to find someone. But PPA time is an entitlement. It's not a something we're given because we like a member of staff. It's something that all teachers are entitled to. So therefore, rather than kind of going through the hassle of trying to find another time or a day, just let them take it. And if they want to take it at home, let them take it home. I know that some teachers used to call it a duvet day when they used to have their PPA at home, but it's just like, it's your PPA at home. And if you choose to sit in bed and do your PPA in your bed, that's fine. I mean, it is always often quite unfortunate when we, the staff who have, because at our school we have kind of half a day PPA every week. They have half a day every week. So, and we try now not to have anyone who has it in the afternoon, because that's really unfortunate for those staff who have to have it in the afternoon, because it means that they don't get the benefit of being able to get up late, and that is half the lot. Half the kind of nicest thing about doing PPA at home is that in the mornings you can just take your time. You can just get up when you're ready, and you can just get ready when you're ready. You log onto your laptop when you're ready. You start your planning, you start your assessment, you start whatever you're doing when you're ready, and there's no rush. Whereas actually, if you've got to do it in the afternoon, you miss out, and so it's not as beneficial as you'd want it to be. So I think, yeah, PPA, whoever said PPA, changing that is a definite, given that flexibility. The other thing that I wanted to touch on before I finish tonight's show is monitoring. Now, monitoring is often the bugbear of teachers, because it sometimes feels like you're being monitored for monitoring's sake. But obviously, since COVID, staff haven't been able to really kind of mix bubbles as much as they did before. Especially at the beginning, there was this thing about not wanting to, having to touch exercise books unnecessarily, and all that jazz. I know, obviously, if you think back in the day, it's like, okay, you'd have to quarantine the books for 2 days before you could do anything with them. But obviously, most of that's gone out the window now. But the whole concept of monitoring and somebody coming around and doing observations and coming into your classroom and looking through books, I think for a lot of schools that's calmed down. I don't know if that's happened in your school. Let me know. Text me, call in, let me know if that's happened in your school. Has monitoring calmed down since we've had COVID? Have the leadership team, have you as a leader done as much monitoring as before? And if you haven't, do you think you'll revert back to type in September? And I know that we have to, and leaders, because I'm a subject leader as well. I lead computing in D&T. Computing, I love. D&T, there's no one else to do it, so I've got to do it. But I know that I need to find out how lessons are going. I need to find out the progress that children are making in subjects. And I need to do that by visiting classes. But I can do it in a different way. I don't have to go into the class during a lesson. I can talk to children. I can stand at the doorway and still see what's happening. I can call children out and ask them the questions. I can look at books after school. There are different ways of doing monitoring. And one of the ways that we've done it slightly differently in terms of thinking about how can we do it and be more effective is that we just sit down and have conversations with the teachers. So the subject leaders, the English subject leader did this recently. She just met with each of the individual teachers. She sat down with them, had a conversation with them, had some books with her, and they just talked and had a conversation, a learning conversation. And I think that's probably what's lost in the whole monitoring cycle of things, is the art of conversation. Leaders can go into a classroom, they flick through the books, and they've got no real context to what's in those books. They've kind of they're seeing the books, they're seeing it's not marked. They're seeing it's not got a learning intention. They're seeing it's not got X, Y, and Z. But there's always going to be a reason behind that. And what happens is, and I'm not saying this happens everywhere, but it's my experience, and on the receiving end, and and having done this myself as somebody doing the monitoring, is that you complete a sheet and you give the sheet back to the staff member. Occasionally you might talk the staff member through that sheet, but most of the time it's kind of like, yeah, here's your feedback, get back to me if you've got any questions. That's not effective, and it's not helping anybody. And I think that's one of the things that we've seen during this period of lockdown. That type of monitoring is not effective. It does not support teaching and learning in any way, shape, or form. Let me know what you think, because for me, the better way of monitoring, if you want to call it monitoring, and kind of, that's not terminology, let's not even go there, but the better way of looking at how learning is progressing in a particular subject is by talking to the people that are doing the teaching and talking to the people who are doing the learning. And by having those conversations, you're going to find out a lot more than if you just look through a book. If you are talking to the students, talking to the children about their learning, and you've got the book with you, they can talk, yeah, because in this lesson when we did this, it was because of X, Y, and Z. And I found this really difficult, because they're talking through their learning. And that's, I think, and this is a kind of almost an all different show altogether. And if any hosts that listen, Genevieve, Sobia, Mal, if you want to do this, I'll give it to you for free. Go for it, run with it, whatever. But for me, monitoring should be a two-way conversation. It should not just be a two-dimensional, let me pick up a book and flick through it and make a judgment based on that. Let me just look around the classroom, look at the displays and make a judgment based on that. Because you don't know what's the thought and the purpose behind it. And I think we need to get to the point where we are talking more and kind of like pointing fingers less. Nobody wants to point a finger, because it then creates a spirit of, it demoralizes people. They spent time, and this is what's happened the other day, actually, because one of my leaders was saying, okay, this teacher hasn't done X, Y, and Z because they've not, there's no evidence of marking and stuff, but they might have talked to the child about it. It's like, well, they need to put VB for verbal feedback. It's like, why? Who is that VB for? Who is that benefiting? That's just for us to show that they've given verbal feedback. But that teacher and that child knows that they've had a conversation, and they know because there's improvements in that child's work. So putting VB next to a piece of VF, sorry, not VB, putting VF next to a piece of work for verbal feedback isn't really benefiting anyone else apart from us as leaders who are monitoring. And so again, I think it's trusting that the teachers that you've employed to do a job, and obviously sometimes you do need to have more evidence because you can see it in the books, you can see in the books when you're talking to children, you can see the progress is not being made. But I think one thing that COVID has taught me is that we need to be having more of a dialogue when it comes to teaching and learning, and we need to be engaging in those conversations with staff and with children, because that's the only way that we're going to find out. So that's kind of an overview of a lot of the things that people have said they're going to keep come COVID lockdown. Now, it's one of those things where it's one thing to say you're going to keep them and this is a good idea, but it'll be interesting to see in a year's time just how many things have been kept, because as humans, we like to. It's easy to revert back to type. It's easy to revert back to what we've known. But maybe the fact that we've done it for a year now, and it's embedded, will ensure that it's something that remains. The whole virtual meetings, online meetings for staff, CPD for staff online. Not having to get them to trek to the other side of London or the other side of Manchester to attend a meeting. Drop off and collection arrangements, parents having a one-way system, zones in the playground so children can play safely wherever they are with whoever they want to without getting knocked over, without kind of worrying about, a year one being trampled on by year six, not intentionally, but just because they're in the same space. And, it's inevitable that something like that's going to happen. I think the other thing also is this knowledge that we can learn outside, and it's taking learning outside. And some of these things are things that we've been trying to do for years. I remember when I used to work for a company called RM, Research Machines, and I used to write bids for free schools and academies when we were trying to get the business to kind of provide the IT infrastructure part of the bid. I think that was one of the things we were trying to do, the whole getting the virtual learning going, and this was sort of 10 years ago. It never took off, But look where we are today. I've got Rick calling. Oh, Rick's gone. Rick was there and then he's gone. Rick, if you want to call back again, please do call back. If you've got something that you want to share that's worked well in your school that you think should be kept, please feel free to call back again and I'll get you on live. But I think, it's amazing when I look back on what we were trying to do 10 years ago in the bids that I was writing. We were talking about online learning platforms. This is a thing of the future, getting teachers to upload the work and then the children can access it from wherever they were, and yet it never quite took off. Then in March 2020, all of a sudden it's just like literally the whole world is doing this thing that we were trying to do 10 years ago. And I think maybe now, because if anybody anybody remembers Fronter, then you'll know how claggy and how awful Fronter was as a learning platform. Whereas something like Microsoft Teams, I've never seen the Google Classroom interface, but I'm sure it is. The user interface is just as effective as Teams. But I think things have moved on. Technology has moved on. Teams is still not necessarily for schools. And I know that there's things that we've had to say to them, look, can you make this? Can you do this change? Can you do this change? But I think it's now something that's will become something that is used. And what we're trying to do in our school is utilize it as much as possible in the classroom still, so that children still get used to using it all the time. It doesn't become something now that's kind of just then put in a corner gathering dust. So I think for us, utilizing Teams more, because even when we have IT computing lessons, putting the links within Teams means that children don't have to kind of go off and find the website somewhere else. It's just convenience of it all. And so I think there's so many positives that have come out of this past year, so much learning that we as an education profession have gone through, and it's been a steep learning curve as well, and we've had to put these things in place really, really quickly. It's like 1 minute we're doing it this way and the next minute we're doing it a totally different way. I remember when, thankfully on the 4th of January, I think it was, we had an inset day. So whereas some schools went into school on the 4th and then were at home on the 5th, we were already at home. But what it did mean was that on that day, staff had to suddenly get used to using a whole new different learning platform, and they did it. And we went through a half a term of turmoil and pain, and it was a challenge, and nobody really wanted to do it. And for some people, they can't wait to see the back of Teams. However, it served the purpose that we needed it to serve. And I think it's got its place. All these changes have got their place. All these changes have been beneficial at some point in time. And so I think whether you're a school that is going to keep staggered lunch times, whether you keep virtual meetings, whether you're going to decide that you're going to keep individual, resources for children, I think now as schools and as an education sector, we are realizing that we don't have to go with the majority. We can do what suits our school. We can do what works best for our school. So if staggered lunch times don't work for a school, then they don't have to do it. If let's not think that we have to do it because the school down the road is doing it, or because the local authority think. Because no, if it doesn't work for our school, then we're not doing it. I think it's going to be really interesting. I might put this question out again in September, just to see what things people have changed, just to see what things people have kept, because I think it's going to be interesting to see how things have moved on. I found this really interesting. I found tonight's show really interesting, and I appreciate you tuning in and listening. And those that have tweeted, I really appreciate you sending in your tweets in terms of what you would like to keep in September. And I think it's a conversation that will keep on going. I've enjoyed today's show. I hope you have too. Please do listen back to some of the other shows. Genevieve did a show this evening on teachers with a side hustle. You know, if that's you recognize yourself, please go back and listen to her show, and kind of interact and let her know what your side hustle is. Interact with us on Twitter, TT Radio 2021. You know, tweet Teachers Talk Radio. We really want to get to know you. We really want you to get to know us, because we are a team of teachers and educators who are doing this because we love to interact. We love to kind of get the conversation going. We love to have those discussions between the education sector, and there have been some amazing discussions that have happened through Teachers Talk Radio. So please do go onto Teachers Talk Radio website, listen back to the previous shows, you know, leave a comment on Twitter, share it. Let's kind of get us above and beyond where we are now, because this is a great initiative. Only just started earlier on in the year, and you know, it's going great guns. So thank you for taking the time to listen. I have been Amanda Wilson, and I hope you've enjoyed listening tonight, and I hope that you'll join me next week for another show. Have a good evening. Have a good weekend. I will see you next week.